Deputy Prime Minister for Social Affairs and Education Minister Lee Jae-myung takes on the role of acting president, pledging to place priority on public livelihoods and national security as South Korea looks ahead to its presidential election on June 3rd. Hello and welcome to this work week's first edition of Press Perspective as Korea returns from a long weekend. It's Wednesday, May 7th here in Seoul. I'm in Sun-hee. We are counting down 27 days to the presidential election on June 3rd. And for more on the political events here in the country, I have Celio Fioretti with French daily Le Croix in the studio. Celio, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Glad to be here.
I also have Fabian Kretschmer with German news agency DPA. Fabian, it's been a while, right? Welcome back to the studio.
Also really happy to be here.
Right. Celio, we will start with you. As I mentioned in the clip at the start of this talk, late last Thursday, South Korea ushered in its third acting president in about 5 months. First, walk us through the events that led to this reality and do tell us a bit about the new acting president, Lee Jae-myung, and the tasks he faces.
Exactly, a third acting president in just 5 months. On Friday, Lee Jae-myung stepped in as acting president, promising to keep things steady ahead of the snap presidential election set on June 3rd. After both the prime minister and the finance minister suddenly stepped down. So what was promised as a calm and a stable period transition of power before the election is all but stable. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who had been acting president since the first impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol, announced he's running for president himself, likely hoping to use his visibility as an acting president to gain support for his ticket. And Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok also resigned. He was acting president for a short period of time when Han Duck-soo was facing trial at the Constitutional Court, but he decided to step down immediately from his duty as acting president. In his statement, he apologized that he couldn't continue leading the country during a serious economical trouble with the U.S. negotiating treaties to maybe exempt Korea from tariffs. That's how Lee Jae-myung, the education minister, ended up in charge. He first entered the National Assembly back in 2004 and later served already as an education minister under both Lee Jae-myung and now Yoon Suk-yeol government. Now, as an acting president, he promised to cooperate with both the cabinet and the opposition-led parliament, the same one that impeached President Yoon, in an effort to stabilize the government finally before the election and make sure the election goes in a peaceful way. On Friday, he chaired an emergency national security council also to prepare the country in case of maybe North Korean provocation in this time of uncertainty in South Korea. Markets have been quite worried about this sudden change of acting president, and they work to minimize maybe the impact on the economy, of the South Korean economy. But in the real life, daily people's life didn't change that much with all this political turmoil. However, they do express a sense of tiredness and worriness about the image of the country, because it's been 3 acting presidents in less than 5 months. The Korean politics seems to be very unstable, very changing, and some people said that maybe they don't trust their politicians that much to care about the country. They think they're only pursuing their personal career, which is overall a bad image for Korean politics, especially just before an election.
Right, Fabian, as Celio just mentioned, Han Duck-soo resigned. Well, former Prime Minister and former acting President Han Duck-soo resigned last week to run for the presidential race. Now, he is hoping to leverage his profile as acting president right after the short-lived martial law to secure voter support. What have you been hearing on the ground about Han Duck-soo?
Yeah, actually, I had the chance to observe him from up close during a very crucial timing, namely just after the martial law crisis. There was a kind of backdoor event by the French and German business chambers. And when they organized the event, of course, nobody expected what would have happened. I mean, that was before the martial law declaration. And so it was very unclear whether he would show up or not. And then he did. And his role was to calm down investors and basically say everything is stable. And I made some kind of interesting observations. First of all, he was very sovereign in his way of talking. He spoke excellent English, and there were several journalists in the crowd. Even though it was a backdoor meeting, closed meeting, we used the chance and asked some really tough questions, and he didn't dodge the questions. So actually I had a quite positive impression from that. And if you look at his biography, I mean, he studied economics at Seoul, Seoul National University, which is the most prestigious university in Korea, then had a master and doctorate at Harvard, also in economics, then basically became a technocrat, was running through the trade ministry up the ranks, and then became a vice trade minister during the Asian financial crisis, late 90s, which was a very traumatic time for South Korea, difficult time. Later, he also became finance minister. I think the most special thing about him is that he served twice as prime minister, both under a liberal president, Roh Moo-hyun, and then later under Yoon Suk-yeol. I mean, that is quite special. And actually, in between, he also was an ambassador. So I think his profile is that he is acting very diplomatic, wants to come off as very moderate. But of course, it's almost an impossible task in a political landscape that is as polarized as in South Korea. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think his main pledge is that he wants to push for a constitutional reform. And that's his agenda.
Right, indeed. Celia, also late last week, the People Power Party elected its candidate for the presidential race, former Labour Minister Kim Moon-soo. What can you tell us about Kim and his career in politics?
Yeah, indeed, former Labour Minister Kim Moon-soo has been selected as the candidate for the People Power Party. Kim is a long-time conservative and was also once a prominent Labour activist. He first entered politics in the early 90s and later served as Gyeonggi province governor. He was also Park Geun-hye's rival in 2012 presidential election. He recently said, it's quite interesting, he said he gave up his useful revolutionist dream when he was a Labour activist to turn more to maybe pragmatic politics after he saw the failure of the communist state in the late 90s. He's been evolving in the conservative side of the politics, and he won the nomination recently over Han Dong-gun with 56% of the vote, according to the party announcements over the weekend. And other candidates have been previously eliminated. So he's now the face of the Conservative Party in Korea. And in his victory speech, Kim said he will team up with anyone to stop Lee Jae-myung and the Democratic Party winning the race. Now the question is, with Han running also for the candidacy, how will both of them maybe figure out something together? Kim is widely seen as closely aligned with Yoon Suk-yeol and carrying on his tough conservative line, especially popular with the party base, the conservative party base, with speeches where he antagonized the opposition, and he has an ambiguous position towards the martial law and towards the whole political crisis. So he's very popular, but also can be very too much on the extreme, too much radical for maybe the centrist voter that both parties are fighting for. So that may be a point that is not as in favor for the presidential election. We'll see how the meeting that is set up with Han and Kim will unfold. That is supposed to happen right now or in a few minutes to maybe merge both candidacies. But Kim doesn't seem to give up early or easily on his ticket for the presidential run. The party maybe will have to settle things down with both candidates to have a one man against Lee Jae-myung.
Right. In about 20 minutes, former Labour Minister Kim Moon-soo and the former acting President Han Duck-soo are slated to meet to talk about a possible merger, as Celio mentioned. That being said, also late last week, Fabian, the Supreme Court decided to overturn a lower court's acquittal of Lee Jae-myung with regard to an earlier election law violation. Could you tell us a bit about the legal hurdles that Democratic Party contender Lee Jae-myung faces?
Yeah, that's really interesting and complicated. I will try my best. So Lee Jae-myung, he was accused of having violated the election law. So what he did was basically giving factual wrong statements. He denied, for example, having went golfing with a former city official, which then turned out to be a wrong statement. So he basically misled the public. And then a lower court actually acquitted him of the accusation that he violated the election law. And now, surprisingly, last week, the Supreme Court basically asked for a retrial. And now, basically, it's still in the open whether he's found to be guilty or not. What is the latest is that the first trial, actually the first hearing, will be after the election. So if he's running, if he would become president, then he can only be found guilty after he's already president. I mean, that has huge implications, because if he would have been found guilty before the election, he would basically be disqualified. Now what is happening is that even if he would become president, he would still have legal troubles, because it's not really clear to what degree his presidential immunity would shield him from the legal troubles. We know that if you have any new cases, then they cannot be brought up against you. But ongoing cases, that is much more complicated. So there is some debate what will happen if he's found to be guilty after he has become president. I mean, that's very theoretical. We don't know yet, but definitely you can see that it's at least from my learning, all those law cases, they are under an immense political pressure from both sides. I mean, both parties basically try to politicize those cases. The Democratic Party says you only try to scapegoat him, want to get him out of the election. The Conservative Party says, no, he's guilty and he should not run for presidency. And I would say let the courts work independently and don't give too much public pressure on those institutions.
Right. Celio, as you mentioned earlier, and keeping in mind what Fabian has just said, there does indeed appear to be a sense, or a tangible sense of fatigue, if you will, among members of the public with regard to the latest political events here in the country. That being said, what do you suppose are the campaign pledges that may serve to sway swing voters in this particular election?
I think the public's main concern for this election is quite simple: stability. After this months of political crisis with the martial law, people want to bring a sense of normalcy back. And everybody's looking at a leader who can manage the economy, but also bring change and stability back into Korea to make it work as before. And for that, candidates have many pledges to maybe bring change to the constitution or social reform to appease the country. Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party is highlighting the need to repair the social contract between Koreans. He promised pension reform, to protect retirees, housing policies, to ease burden on younger population, and also a sort of cleanup of politics, what that means. And he pledged to act as a bridge, maybe between politician and citizen, maybe a bridge that has been struck by a sense of distrust in the later months with all the political crisis that we had. On the conservative side, Kim Won-soo is also leaning in theme of discipline and renewal, maybe bring back order, bring back some sort of authority to bring some order and peace and stability in the country. He's talking more about a financial regulation, preparing the economy for any future threat, whether it's technological or foreign threat with the US or China. So that's two ways of bringing back stability. And we saw also with Han Duck-soo, as Fabian mentioned, maybe a constitutional reform to rebalance the power between the parliament and the presidential office. All of that is some bids, some attempts to attract voters with some sort of promise of stability. We'll see in what way people react to it, but the message is clear both on left or right. People try to appease the country and bring back stability. That's the main concern, and that's what they're trying to answer.
Right, Fabian, what do you care to add to this? What have you been hearing on the ground with regard to what the voters may want from their candidates?
Yeah, what I hear from when I talk to people in Korea is actually quite different than what many editors, colleagues back in Europe, or also my friends back in Europe would expect. They think that, for example, North Korea policy is the big topic, which actually it is not. When I talk to people on the ground, they are mostly concerned about economic policies, domestic problems, and especially if you live in Seoul, but general in South Korea, living costs have become quite high. And everyone can feel that if you visit a supermarket or just even a traditional market, which are usually a little bit cheaper, but even there, like basic things, rice, vegetables, fruit, are actually becoming really quite expensive, and that is a burden, especially for people with not so privileged jobs. And I think that is a big concern, to have reasonable prices. And then, of course, related to that, housing prices. The Korean dream is still like you have to have ownership of preferably an apartment. And if you look at the prices, I mean, that's becoming more utopian, more difficult with a simple job to get into that. So basically, the decisive factor is becoming whether you have rich parents or not. And that brings me to another point. The inequality in this country is also rising. So between the 10% with the fewest income and the richest 10%, the gap is really widening. I think that's also concerning. Maybe also, let me mention that the demographic change, that's maybe something is kind of abstract and people would not voice that so explicitly, but I think that's a huge challenge for the next president to tackle that, because if you already go outside of Seoul, you see that, yeah, you have a lot of old people, a lot of also houses that are vacant, and I think there is a lot of change, and that is a big also problem for the future economy, for the productivity. So I would say there are quite a big challenges now, but I mean, as has been demonstrated in the past, that South Korea can reinvent itself, but I think there's now really a sense that something has to be done.
Right, indeed. All that on the domestic front, of course. Celio, on the diplomatic front, once the new administration does come into power, do tariff talks with the US look to take priority? And if that is the case, what are your prospects with regard to productive progress on that front?
Yeah, the South Korean government is rushing to strike a deal with US President Donald Trump. Even before Donald Trump floated the idea of a 25% tariff on Korean goods, South Korea was already dealing with tariff over cars, steels, and aluminum. Trade policy is generally a strong suit for conservative candidates, and that may boost the profile of a conservative candidate in the presidential run. Maybe more, they have this sense of more business-friendly in tradition and values on the right. And people, as Han Duck-soo or Kim Un-soo, are more used to deal with factories, companies, and financial problem. Still, even if the conservative win, their option might be limited with Donald Trump. According to analysts, the U.S. is not expecting to budge on core tariff, like the 10% baseline on goods for the auto tariff, for example, which leave little room for negotiation. That's why Seoul is now trying to broaden the scope of negotiation to include maybe some other fields, other strategic component of the economy that would be beneficial for them with the U.S. to maybe get an agreement on. Some people, some analysts thought that maybe these new fields would be like investment or defense contracts with some technology transfer, access between US and Korea, especially to counter China's policy in the region. There's growing pressure for South Korea to align more closely with Washington against China, so we'll see maybe there is some room for improvement on that. And one other topic that Seoul really insists on is shipbuilding. They already made some promise, and Trump called for it even in his presidential run a few months ago. He wants Korea to invest more in American ports, to build a navy, build better economy there, and that's where Korea has the expertise. It's the second biggest shipbuilder in the world, and Korea seems to be moving on that front, and that will unlock, I think, a lot of deal with US.
Right. Fabian, speaking as a German journalist, do you see South Korea and Europe perhaps working to expand their security interests? I ask because Mr. Trump has been accusing both parties of freeloading with regard to defense. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, basically we are sitting in the same boat, metaphorically speaking. As you mentioned, Europe is accused of abusing the trade system with the US. South Korea also has a huge trade surplus. I mean, I don't share those accusations by Trump. I think they're baseless. But I mean, basically, we have to deal with the reality, how it is. And in that regard, I think European countries and South Korea could learn from each other, could help each other out in terms of trade security, but also in terms of traditional security. We have learned that with the war in Ukraine, that conflicts are global, and what happens in Ukraine has also effects on the Indo-Pacific here. I mean, with the involvement of North Korean soldiers, for example. And I think this awareness has risen massively, for example, in Germany, and I think also in South Korea. So when I talk to diplomats here in South Korea, they express actually their intent to seek for closer cooperation with South Korea. I think that would be mutually beneficial, but I think there are also some limits because national interests are sometimes not completely aligned, and Europe is also quite diverse. You have some countries in, let's say, Southeast Europe who have different views on foreign policy, for example. And then South Korea also get the notion that they're a little bit afraid of getting dragged into a conflict. I mean, I'm talking about Ukraine now, that, for example, if Europe would push too much or would expect too much cooperation from South Korea, that maybe it might not be too good for them. So I think it really depends, and probably also depends who will be the next president.
Right, and speaking about who will be the next president, Celio, quite a number of pundits have been saying that South Korea's policy in North Korea will shift depending on which party gains power. What do you envision after the June 3rd presidential race?
Indeed, in the last term, during President Yoon Suk-yeol's presidency, inter-Korean relation took quite a hit, depending whose fault, that's everybody's opinion, but North Korea officially labeling South Korea as an hostile state is something new and something quite serious to consider. Now, conservative candidates, Han Duck-soo or Kim Won-soo, on both sides are quite following on the steps of Yoon Suk-yeol, having a more hardline stance against North Korea. Kim Won-soo also sometimes recalled the idea of building a nuclear-powered submarines in partnership with the US in Korea to boost local deterrence. He has many ideas like that to really improve and work in cooperation with the US to maybe impose something on North Korea and have like a stronger dialogue with them, if a dialogue at all. On the other hand, Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung has once more of this idea of a sunshine policy as we had in the early 2000s, maybe more dialogue, maybe more cooperation with the North, try to bring change to the North through dialogue. It didn't work so much in the early 2000s. Maybe a renewal of this policy will not bring so much change. That's the future will tell us if he wins the race. But that's more of the idea, maybe distance itself from Washington, having this sort of statu quo with China and Japan and working from Korea to North Korea and maybe bring some change, negotiation. We'll see maybe more increase of humanitarian aid to people in North Korea, or maybe some try to influence the regime in some ways. But that's two different and totally opposite strategy concerning the North. So again, we'll see who wins the election, but that will bring certainly some big change in North Korean policy.
Right, and staying with North Korea policy, there has been talk, Fabian, about the Trump administration seeking or exploring its options of engaging with North Korea. Against that backdrop, how does South Korea, in your opinion, seek to remain relevant amid US efforts to engage North Korea?
That would be very tough, but I mean, first, I would say that Trump so far has shown relatively little interest in North Korea, but one day this will come that he wakes up and will give it a shot to try to solve that. And we know from the Moon Jae-in administration, the last time when Trump tried to engage with North Korea, to stay in the driver's seat, the strategy of South Korea was basically to give Trump this platform and flatter his ego, but in the background actually trying to stay in control. That could maybe happen again, but Trump has changed. We don't know yet, so it's difficult to speculate.
All right. Hopefully we get a clearer picture after June 3rd then. All right, Fabian, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Celio, thank you very much for your insights. Right, well, that ends Press Perspective today. Thank you for watching and do join us again same time tomorrow.